This video is talking about inverse functions and how we find them. So first of all, we have to know what an inverse function is. And just to remind you what that is if a function is what is considered one-to-one, meaning there's one x value for every y value and one y value for every x value, so there's no duplicates on either side, then it has an inverse. And so what that means is an inverse is that we swap x's and y's. So if I had a table of values, that were 0, 1, and 2, 5, 8, and 11, then the inverse to this, notice that there's no repeat x's and no repeat y's, so this is one-to-one. In this case, then an inverse would mean that we swap x's and y's. So now the new inverse function, the x's would be 5, 8, 11, and the y's would be 0, 1, and 2. Pretty easy. So let's look at what that means in terms of some examples. And if I don't have a list of values, I just have a written equation. So we want to find the inverse to this equation. So what we do is that same idea. We swap x and y. So we want to swap x and y. So they're going to change places. So we're going to say x equals 3y minus 6. Then our next step is to solve for y. So we still want it to be y equals. So in this case, we're going to add 6 to both sides. So we have 3y equals x plus 6. And then divide by 3 to everything. So we have y equals 1/3 x plus 2. And we can swap that around to say y equals 1/3 x plus 2. And so that's our inverse function. Let's look at another example. Now remember, when things are written in function notation, they're written in terms of something like this, f of x equals. So remember, that's just telling us that it is a function, it follows the function rules. So, but the same process applies, because we have to remember that even though it's f of x, we can swap it to know that that means y as well. Okay, and so to find our inverse function, swap x and y. So x equals 5y minus 5. We are going to then solve for y, so we're going to add 5 to both sides. So we have x plus 5 equals 5y. And then we are going to divide both sides by 5. So we get 1/5 x plus 1 equals y. And again, we can write it as y equals 1/5 x plus 1. Now, thing is, this was written in function notation, so we definitely want to write it in inverse notation. And so to be able to tell the reader that it's an inverse, the y then becomes this inverse notation like this. And that's so that if anyone was reading this, we would know that that means inverse function. All right, last example. We want to find the inverse. This time they gave us the graph of the original function. So let's get that drawn up here real quick. All right, and all right, so our original function is this one. Okay, so to find the inverse, we need to know what equation this is in the first place. So we need to look at our y-intercept and our slope. So remember, slope is rise over run. So we want to count these spaces. So how many spaces does it go up from point to point? So 1, 2, so it goes up 2 spaces. How many does it go over? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So right now we know that slope is rise over run. And so our rise was 2, our run was 5, so our m is 2/5. And then we need our y-intercept. So where does it cross the y-axis? Right here at -2. And so we know our b is -2. So the equation, our original function, is y equals 2/5 x minus 2. Now let's find the inverse using the same process we used before. Swap x and y. So x equals 2/5 y minus 2. And then the next step is to solve for y. So we're going to add 2 to both sides. So we have x plus 2 equals 2/5 y. Now remember, this one we can do in a couple different ways. To get rid of the 2/5, it's 2/5 times y, so we can divide by 2/5. Another way to think about it is to multiply by 5/2, the reciprocal, which means we have to multiply the whole other side by 5/2 as well. Either way works. When I do that, 2/5 times 5/2, 2 times 5 is 10, 5 times 2 is 10, 10 divided by 10 is 1. So we have y on this side. Now we want to go ahead and distribute that 5/2. So 5/2 times x is 5/2 x. And then 5/2 times 2. So remember, it's 5/2 times 2 over 1. And so then we get 10 over 2, which is 5. And so our inverse equation is y equals 5/2 x plus 5. That's it for these examples in this video. As you work through your lesson, make sure if you have any questions to ask your teacher. Have a great day.